Hi, everybody. Welcome to core reading number 2, Native Americans of the Great Plains and the Southwest. First thing I want you to notice is the reading is divided into two parts. And if you look at your reading questions, you'll see that the first 6 questions will appear on the first page, Native Americans of the Great Plains. And questions 7 through 14 will appear on the second page of your reading, Native Americans of the Southwest. So we can see this is already chunked up or divided conveniently for you to help you find the answers. So I'm going to start reading, and we're going to be looking for our first couple questions right off the bat. Where are the Great Plains located? And how is the eastern part of the Great Plains different from the western part? Here we go. The Great Plains Cultural Region is a vast area of treeless grasslands. The Great Plains stretch for 2,000 miles from the Rockies to the Mississippi Valley and from Canada to the Gulf of Mexico. The eastern part of this region has more water and softer soil than the western part. In the drier west, short, dense grasses provided perfect grazing for millions of buffalo. So I can see the answer for the first question, where the Great Plains located. Grab my highlighter here. Make sure that it is transparent. I'm going to zoom in so we can all see a little bit better. And it looks like this is where they're located. They stretch for 2,000 miles from the Rocky Mountains to the Mississippi Valley and from Canada to the Gulf of Mexico. I also saw the answer to question 2 there. How is the eastern part of the Great Plains different from the western part? And the reading says that the eastern part has more water and softer soil than the western part. And in the west, short, dense grasses provided perfect grazing for millions of buffalo. So I can mark those questions. I can mark that highlighting question 1 and question 2. I'll move my numbers next to my questions, next to my highlighting for the questions. And we're ready to move on to the next couple paragraphs. Now we can also check off. Looks like we've answered question 1 and number 2. And we're going to be looking for, how did Native Americans of the Plains catch and kill buffalo? Highlight at least one strategy that they used. On the eastern plains, various groups took up farming, going on buffalo hunting trips only a few months each year. On the western plains, Native Americans followed buffalo herds much of the year. In the spring and early summer, small groups lay in ambush where buffalo came to drink. The hunters gripped hardwood bows, reinforced with strips of buffalo tendon. Taking aim, each man let loose a wooden arrow tipped with a sharp stone and arrayed with feathers to help it fly straight. So I can see a few, or I can see at least one way that the hunters captured or killed the buffalo. They lay in ambush where the buffalo came to drink, and then they use arrows tipped with a sharp stone to kill the buffalo. But I'm going to continue reading. There might be more. In the fall, huge buffalo herds gathered, and plains people traveled in larger bands. The men sometimes made a trap for the buffalo by heaping stones into 2 short walls to form a V-shaped passage. The walls forced the buffalo closer together as they approached a cliff. Behind the herd, people set a grass fire or made loud noises to panic the buffalo. The animals stampeded between the walls and over the cliff edge. Below, waiting hunters finished them off with spears or bows and arrows. So the question asked us to highlight at least one way that they kill buffalo. I found this pretty interesting, so I'm going to highlight A second way, they made a trap by heaping stones into two short walls. This V-shaped passage, they caused a stampede, and the buffalo fell over the cliff edge. All of this helps answer question number 3. So I'm just going to type 3 next to all of my highlighting here. And then I'm going to move on to my next question. So 3 is complete. And now I'm looking for at least 3 things. Besides food, what else did Native Americans of the plains use the buffalo for? So they use the buffalo for food, but what else did they use the buffalo for? And I can see my next section actually starts with the words using the buffalo. Buffalo provided the main food for plains people. Women and children cut up the buffalo with bone knives. Extra meat was dried and kept for winter. Plains people used every part of the buffalo. Buffalo hides were turned into shields, waterproof containers, warm robes, and bedding. For clothing and bags, women softened the hides with bone scrapers and rubbed in buffalo brains and fat. Buffalo hair and sinew were twined into bowstrings and ropes. Horns and hooves became spoons and bowls, or were boiled down to make glue. Dried buffalo dung provided fuel for fires. Buffalo provided materials for housing as well. Using tendons as thread, women sewed 8 to 20 buffalo skins together. The skins were then fastened around a tall cone of poles to make a teepee, a Plains word for dwelling. So I kept reading through a couple paragraphs. There are actually 3 paragraphs because there was just so much information about how they used the buffalo. I saw that they made the buffalo hides, which is their skin, into shields, into waterproof containers, robes, bedding, bowstrings and ropes. They used the horns for spoons and bowls. They made glue out of the buffalo. They even used the buffalo for housing by making these teepees. That's a lot. I think that we've got more than 3 there. So I'm going to add my text box. That was the answer to question 4. Checking my question list. I'm now going to be looking for question 5, and I think also question 6. Who introduced or brought the horse to the Great Plains, and how did the horse affect Plains Indian culture? And this is all going to come from one short paragraph. Plains people became even more successful when Spanish explorers introduced horses to the region. With horses, hunters could bring down more buffalo and move faster and more comfortably to new hunting grounds. Well, I think I can practically highlight that whole paragraph, but I'm going to be a little selective here. I'm going to highlight Spanish explorers because that was the answer to number 5. It was the Spanish explorers who brought the horse to the Americas. Believe it or not, the horse went extinct in North America after the last ice age, and there were no horses here until around the 1500s. The Spanish brought horses back to the Great Plains. And I also saw how with horses, hunters could bring down more buffalo and move faster and more comfortably to new hunting grounds. So I highlighted bring down more buffalo and move faster. And that is the answer to question 6. So at this point, I'm going to move on to the second page, which is about the Native Americans of the Southwest. And I can cross off question 5 and 6. And I'll now be looking for the answer to question 7 and probably 8. I like to read 2 questions ahead. What present-day states are included in the Southwest cultural region? And what types of environments does this region include? Actually, let's make this just a little bit bigger. And we'll be looking for question 7 and 8. The Southwest Cultural Region includes present day Arizona, New Mexico, southern Utah and Colorado, and portions of Texas, Oklahoma, and California. This region has many environments: canyons, mountains, deserts, and flat topped mesas. It even has two major rivers, the Colorado and the Rio Grande, but rain seldom falls anywhere. So we're looking for what states are included in the Southwest Cultural Region. And I noticed several: Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, Colorado, parts of Texas, parts of Oklahoma, and California. And that would be the answer to question 7. And I was also looking for what environments does this region include? And I saw that it includes canyons, mountains, deserts, and these things called mesas, which is kind of like a hill with a flat top. So that's your answer for question 8. But I think I actually read the answer to question 9. So I'm going to cross off 7 and 8. 9 says how much rain falls in this region. And I noticed at the end of this paragraph it said that rain seldom falls anywhere. Seldom is one of your smart words, and it means hardly at all or almost never happens. So that tells me that there was almost no rain in this area. So I'm going to mark that as my answer to question 9. And now we can look at question 10. What were some different ways that Native American groups living in the Southwest survived? I think that word survived is going to be the key word here. Let's continue reading. The heat and lack of water made living in the Southwest a challenge. Yet some Native Americans learned to love this arid land. The whole Southwest was a house made of dawn, goes an old Indian song. There were many colors on the hills and on the plain, and there was a dark wilderness on the mountains beyond. Mesa people. Different groups found different ways of surviving in the Southwest. Some lived as nomadic, wandering desert hunters. Along the Colorado River, small groups hunted, gathered, and farmed. Others planted fields of corn, beans, and squash on the tops of high, flat areas called mesas. Well, I think I have found some ways that they survived, so I'm going to highlight those. They found different ways of surviving. Some lived as nomadic, wandering hunters. Small groups hunted, gathered, and farmed. Some planted fields of corn, beans, and squash on top of these things called mesas, which I know is going to be important for your notes. I'll actually circle that word for you here. Mesas. And I'm going to make that the answer to question 10. Now, going back to my question list, question 11 is going to be how did they build their homes? And also maybe looking for what their villages were called. So moving on. The Mesa people lacked trees for building homes. Instead, they made homes from the earth itself. Using bricks of adobe, sun-baked clay, they built thick-walled houses that protected them from summer heat and winter cold. Their villages looked like apartment houses that reached up to 4 stories high and had hundreds of rooms. A single village, called a pueblo, might house 1,000 people. So, checking my question again, how did they build their homes and what were their villages called? Go back to my highlighter. It looks like they built their homes from the earth itself using these adobe bricks. They built thick walled houses. And these villages were called a pueblo. So that would be the answer to question 11. And just want to check my list here. Also the answer to question 12. Pueblos. My last two questions. What was the most important crop that they grew? And how did these Indians find ways to water their crops? Looking for two different ways. To protect their bodies from the sun, Mesa people wore clothes made of cotton that they grew, spun, and wove into cloth. Using plants and minerals, they dyed fabrics with bright colors. Corn culture. Despite living in a desert, the early Mesa people learned to grow corn, beans, and squash. Corn was by far their most important crop. To make the most of infrequent rain, farmers planted near naturally flooded areas, like the mouths of large stream beds or the bases of mesas, where rain runoff flowed. Men dug irrigation ditches from the streams to the fields and built small dams to hold summer rain. Girls spent many hours a day grinding corn kernels into cornmeal. The women cooked the cornmeal into bread in clay ovens. In clay pots, they cooked stews of corn, rabbit meat, and chili peppers. So I think I found the answer to question 13. Corn was their most important crop. I'll cross that off and make sure that I number it. And I also saw two ways that they watered their crops. I saw that sometimes they planted their crops near places where there was just naturally water, like the base of mesas, those tall, flat hills. But sometimes they had to actually dig ditches. These irrigation ditches were ditches that they dug from streams and then brought the water to their fields. And they built small dams to hold summer rain. So I could highlight that entire uh, sentence, two sentences there. And once I add my number here, question 14, I can double check, and I have now completed core reading 2.